Francisco Lazo, you are all set to go if we all want to throw on our video. Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Linda Griffin, and I'm the Education Programs Coordinator with BusinessLink. Thank you for joining us today. We have our friends from Statistics Canada here today who are going to be showing us and talking to us about how to find statistics on the StatsCan website and how to make some informed business decisions doing that. So I'm pleased to welcome back Darren again, who's going to be giving this conversation to us today and showing us the ropes on how to do some of your market research and understand what you're doing through the StatsCan website. Before we begin, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. BusinessLink acknowledges and respects that we are on traditional land, meeting grounds, territories, and gathering places and traveling routes of Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, and the home to many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the lands of those who have come before us, reside here, now, and in the future. A few housekeeping items. You are welcome to ask questions, and the way to do that is to head on over to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and type your question into Q&A. Once in a while, I'll pause throughout the session and ask a question, and we'll also be able to ask questions at the end as well. You're also going to find that Francisco is going to be posting some helpful links into the chat box. If you want to go into chat and grab some links along the way, you're welcome to do that. We do not hand out the slides for these presentations, but this is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. So without further ado, Darren, if you want to unmute and take it away and share your screen and do all that wonderful stuff, please do, and welcome and thanks for coming today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Linda, for the introduction. Before I begin, I'd just like to give, I have a couple of colleagues that are here today joining me. If they would like, please feel free to say hello and where you're joining from. Francisco, you want to go first?
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Welcome aboard. I'm from the Office of Statistics Canada in Vancouver, the Research Center. I will be posting, as Linda already mentioned, some of the links that Darren will be mentioning during the presentation. Feel happy to try to help, and I will pass the microphone to my colleague.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laszlo Tamazuri. I'm a consulting analyst with Statistics Canada out of the Winnipeg office. Hope you guys enjoy the seminar that Darren's going to be facilitating today. There's lots of good information on it, so I'll let him start.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So as Francisco and Laszlo said, we will be providing a lot of information today, and Francisco will be posting links to some of the material that I'm going to be referencing. Laszlo and I are joining you from Winnipeg, so we are in Treaty 1 territory. So we'd just like to acknowledge that in the spirit of reconciliation as well. So I'm going to share my slides. As I said, we have a lot of material that we're going to try and cover today. Linda knows that if there are questions that pop up during the session, she's welcome to interject and ask. We're happy to answer people's questions if we can, and I'll try and leave some time at the end as well. So let me share my screen.
Sure, Darren. And while you're doing that, I see that someone's raised their hand. So Mohammed, you've raised your hand, but we can't help you if you only raise your hand. So if you want to lower your hand and put your questions into Q&A or into chat, I can help you. So folks who are raising their hands, please slide your questions on over into Q&A. If it's a technical issue or some sort of issue there, you can ask those questions and we'll try to help.
Perfect. So as I said, hello everyone. So bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue everyone. Today we're going to be providing you with some information about how you can use the information that Statistics Canada provides as a means to have a better understanding of a whole host of different topics that might be related to business development or business planning and things of that nature. So that's going to be the subject and sort of focus of today. We have a lot that we want to try and cover, and we want to sort of demonstrate how you can use information from Statistics Canada to do things like identify your target market if you're trying to narrow in or be sort of determine how large a potential market you might have. We're going to introduce you to some data that allows you to get an understanding of what people are spending their money on, which is obviously going to be really useful if you think about the types of businesses people might be considering. We're going to talk about how some of the information is reported. So a little introduction to North American Industrial Classification Codes and National Occupation Codes, just because as you explore much of the published data, you'll see that many of them, or much of the data, is reported by NAICS codes or industry codes. So it's really helpful to have even a basic understanding of how the codes are structured and where your business might fit in. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the other data sources, as well as hopefully we'll have time. We're going to point you to some data that's not necessarily reported on Statistics Canada's website, but it's Statistics Canada data. And that's data on financial and business performance. So business revenues and business balance sheet information that we think might be helpful to you. And then if I have time, and we never know how much time we'll have, we'll do a quick navigation just so you become familiar with Statistics Canada's website. And again, before we begin, we'll just quickly talk a little bit about why Francisco and Laszlo and I are here and are always welcome to come and speak to these sessions, because we work for Statistics Canada, and as the national statistical agency, part of our job is to provide good, reliable, objective information to Canadians about a whole host of topics, not just business-related topics, but population and resources and culture and environment and a whole host of different topics. And so we want to make sure that people are familiar with the type of information that's available. And we want to make sure that people are comfortable or feel comfortable sort of coming to Statistics Canada's website and finding what they're looking for. So part of our job is to make sure that, we collect all of this data, we make it available, but, we always want to remind Canadians that this is your data and we want you to be using it to the full extent possible. So today I'm going to be focusing on just a handful of specific surveys that Statistics Canada does, but there are over 400 active surveys that we're collecting information on. So this is just a very sort of tip of the iceberg in terms of the type of information that's available. And again, if you're not familiar with using Statistics Canada data, we're hoping that this is the beginning of your journey. Sort of use it as a springboard to start to see what's available, and then as you explore further, we're hoping that you'll be able to grasp even more and more information that will be helpful to you. So with that, let's talk a little bit about sort of the focus of today. And people might be coming to this session from a number of different sort of information needs. You might be thinking about developing a business plan or trying to get a handle on just sales volumes and things of that nature for a particular product or a particular commodity. And so these are some of the sort of questions and types of information we're going to try and present today in terms of how the data can help you identify products or industries that are growing or in demand, or conversely, identify industries that might be on the decline. We'll talk a little bit about how the information or how the sort of information that's available compares among different communities and across different provinces, and you can use that information to compare different communities by industry and things of that nature. We'll also give you an indication of sort of, as I said, business performance information to get a sense of how your business might be faring based on other businesses of similar sizes and things of that nature. So those are the type of the questions that we sort of assume that you're coming to this session with. And then we're going to sort of point you to how some of the data that Statistics Canada has may be able to help answer some of those questions. So for example, when we talk about target populations, we're going to introduce you to, if you're not familiar already, with the census of population. And so we'll quickly talk a little bit about what the census of population is and how it could be so useful as a data set to help you identify particular segments of your population or your target population. We're going to talk a little bit about data sources that provide information on particular industries and current trends and things of that nature, as well as spending patterns and some labor market information as well. This isn't going to focus, this session isn't going to focus on labor market information, but we'll talk about how that fits into just a overall understanding of sort of business conditions and business considerations, and how you can use that information to your advantage. So I said that we'll start. So this is a session that focuses on business data, but we're not necessarily going to start by talking about business data. We're going to start by talking about the census. And so the census is a complete enumeration of the entire population, which is done every 5 years. So in 2021 was the last census of population that was done. The next census will be in 2026. And the reason we include it in this presentation is because the census is one of the few data sources that's going to provide really detailed information on target population characteristics. So there's detailed information about age and incomes, the type of incomes that different populations might have, sources of income, the amount of income. But it also has information that characterizes populations by their educational attainment level or language capabilities. So you might be thinking about a particular niche that you might want to focus on in terms of underserved populations or populations that might be looking for services in a particular language. The census will allow you to look to see, how many Farsi speakers there are in your community, or how many people speak Mandarin, or things of that nature, or Polish or French or whatever it might. So the census is really useful in that respect. It's also useful in terms of understanding the composition of the population, how many families there are, what's the makeup, are there a lot of children, are there communities that have a lot of children or communities that don't have many children, or marital status, so people are married or single or divorced or separated and things of that nature. And the reason we highlight this is because it allows you to have a better understanding of the characteristics of your population. In addition to, it's not highlighted here on this slide, the census also allows us to look at characteristics like immigrants and visible minority populations, so the racialized populations. You get an understanding of what the ethnic composition of your community or different communities are. How large is the Filipino population? Or how large is the Polish population? The census allows you to answer some of those questions, and it allows you to answer questions for small levels of small communities across the country. So wherever you're joining us from today, if you're in Halifax, or if you're in Winnipeg, or if you're in Vancouver, or a small community in a rural community, the census is often one of the few data sources where the actual data will be available for small communities, unlike many other data sources which aren't able to do so. And I'll explain why some of the other data sources aren't able to provide or produce information at such small levels of geography. So that's the census, and that, as I said, is a key data source to help identify your target population. And there, this is just a quick example of some of the information that's available from the census. So obviously, business information, it's helpful to have a sense of what type of income, disposable income, your potential market might have. So the census allows us to look at things like average income and median income and things of that nature across the country. So these are just some of the examples of how you can use census information. So that's a starting point for understanding how this information can be used from a business perspective. The second data set that I'm going to highlight is, again, not specific to businesses per se, but it's an extremely useful data source. And that is a survey called the Survey of Household Spending. And the information available from this survey is, as its name implies, it gives us an indication of how much households are spending on consumer goods, cell phone packages, how much consumers are spending on meals, food, meals in restaurants and things of that nature. So if you're thinking about establishing a restaurant, or if you're thinking about establishing a car repair shop, you can use the Survey of Household Spending to get an indication of what households are spending on a host of different goods and services. The survey even lets you look at how spending patterns differ by what we call income quintiles. So low income, middle income, and high income. And what are high income households spending their goods, their disposable income on compared to lower income households? So you'll be able to say, households in my community spend on average $500 on groceries or things of that nature. So this is one of the examples of one of the surveys that, as we say on the slide here, can be really useful to sort of think about marketing plans and ideas of that nature. So that's another key source of information available from Statistics Canada that we want business planners or people thinking about businesses to be familiar with and to start using, and to recognize how you can sort of explore this data further. So that's another really important data source. And this is just, as I said, when we showed the example from the census, this is an example of the type of data that's available from the Survey of Household Spending. This is a survey that's done every 2 years. So you can look to see how spending patterns are changing over time. So for example, in 2021, we can look at how Canadians were spending on different goods and services, average spending on shelter, average spending on food or recreation, healthcare and personal care items, and how that's changed over time. So this is data that's going to be available at the national, at the provincial level. So it gives you a rough indication of how you can think about what people might be spending on the service that you're thinking of providing, or the business that you're currently providing or currently working in. So that's Survey of Household Spending. Oh, is there a question?
Yeah, I think we have some people going.
Please.
So how recent is the data? It looks like we have data from 2021, and
Yeah.
Folks are probably curious about why we wouldn't have more current data. So I know you've got a good answer for that, probably, because why would that be?
Well, for many statistical or national statistical data sets, there is oftentimes a bit of a lag. There's, we are trying to have data more readily available in a more timely manner, but we also have to make sure that the information we're releasing is accurate and reliable. And so, the survey is done, it's a sample survey. So when it's unlike a census where we collect information from everyone, the Survey of Household Spending is a sample survey. So we randomly select households from across the country. We collect that information. We have to then analyze it and weight it so we can inflate it to be reflective. So there are a whole host of sort of technical issues that go into it. There's also, just to be brutally honest, there's the issue of cost. So from the National Statistical Agency perspective, we have to weigh the data needs of consumers and businesses with the cost of producing the data. And so in this case, the Survey of Household Spending is conducted every 2 years. Why it's conducted every 2 years that's a decision that's a little bit higher than I'm at to be able to make those decisions, but that's just the nature of the data. So the next Survey of Household Spending will be conducted in 2023, and that data I don't know when that data will be released, but that will be the next version of the information. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but it usually comes down to the cost and things of that nature. Any other questions at this point? It's a good question, and it's a question I want people to be thinking about in terms of the timeliness of the data, the relevance of the data, and things of that nature. Those are good questions that good data consumers should always be asking themselves. Any other questions at this point?
Just a technical one from Jen. Is there a setting that prevents attendees from copying the links? I'm not sure. I've been clicking on the links. They seem to be working for me.
I can't see the link, so I'm not
No
sure.
worries, Darren. You just
If I
carry on.
might-
We'll tackle this one in the background while you carry on.
Okay.
Okay, if I just might, I'm trying to put the links directly. If that doesn't work, feel free to copy and paste directly into your address bar in your engine, and it should work anyway. Sorry about that. Thank you.
And I will say, if you do have questions, you're welcome to reach out to Statistics Canada afterwards. I think on the last slide, we'll have our InfoStats contact information. And again, I'm not sure if everyone here is from Alberta. You might be joining from other locations. So you can use that information, that email, and that's our generic contact. And they will then pass your question along to consulting analysts like Laszlo and I are consulting analysts based in Manitoba. So any questions from Manitoba, we'll often try and answer. Vancouver, Francisco's based in Vancouver. And so you're welcome to send questions to InfoStats if you want to explore these further after the presentation. So any other questions? If not, I'll get, and again, Linda, feel free to interject if I'm going over something that people, if I'm going over it too quickly, or if it's something that people would like to delve into further, feel free. I have no issues with spending more time on a particular topic. So
no worries. At the end, maybe we can tackle a little bit of import-export data if you have time.
Oh, I'm going to actually get to that. So as I said, we're trying to cover quite a lot in this session, and I will talk about in two different perspectives the type of data that is available for trade. We're going to focus specifically on trade, retail trade, and wholesale trade, and I'm going to show you some data sources that are available to look at. It's actually a great segue because the trade data is reported in what's called NAP, so the North American Product Classification Code. We don't go into that in great detail here, but I just want people to be familiar with how the information is reported. So you can use trade data from Statistics Canada to look to see what are the commodities that Canadian businesses are importing, or what is Canada exporting, and to whom? What are we exporting to China? What are we exporting to Mexico? What are we exporting to Iran? What are we exporting to the United States? So the trade data, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. The trade data will allow us to answer some of those questions.
Great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let questions build for
Sure.
a little while here. Let's
Sure.
take a pause and let the questions build, and then we'll start to answer them a little further in.
That works and like I said, we've got a lot to cover, and I'm sort of beginning the session by talking a little bit about data sources that aren't necessarily business specific. And the next example, or the next sort of slide, is an example of that. And I've already alluded to the fact that as you start to explore the data, you're going to start to see it reported in a particular way. One of the ways that like trade data is reported by NAPS, North American Product Classification, but much of the data on businesses and industries are reported by NAICS, or the North American Industrial Classification System. And this is a classification system used by Canada, the United States, Mexico, so that our industry classifications are comparable. And the NAICS is a sort of a system where we identify the broad activity of a business, its activity, it's what it does in terms of the nature of its business. And then we allow, or the NAICS allows for further and further and further refinement. So you'll see the sort of the classification from a very broad 2-digit NAICS code, a combination of food services. You can appreciate how broad and what that might entail, to a little bit more detail. So the longer the NAICS code, the more detailed the characteristics of the industry that NAICS code is describing. So we can go from a very broad classification, accommodation, to accommodation services, and then accommodation services designed specifically or focusing specifically on travelers. So if you're thinking of starting a bed and breakfast or hotel or things of that nature, or a resort for people visiting Canada, you can use or identify which NAICS code that business activity would fall under. And I won't go into too much detail because we have a lot to cover, but if you go to the Statistics Canada's website, there is Francisco will likely post the link. You can start to explore the different NAICS codes and see where your business or the business you're thinking about might apply. You know, hairdressing or whatever it might be. You can start to see where that might apply in the NAICS code. And you'll also see a description of the type of activities that those businesses do. And the reason I mention it here, again, it's a little bit of a foreshadowing, is because hopefully we'll have time. There's a data source on Innovation and Science Canada, national government department, that uses Statistics Canada data that reports information on business performance and financial performance for different businesses, and they report it using the NAICS codes. So being familiar with the NAICS codes is going to be really helpful, just to be able to understand, what the data is relating to and referring to. So that's the other sort of aspect of the information that's really useful. And then now we're starting to get into actual specific business-related surveys and data sets. And the first one that we often point people to, and we want people to be familiar with, is a data set that gets released twice a year. So once in December and once in June, once in June and once in December. And it's a data set called the Canadian Business Counts. And you might not be surprised to find out that the data is reported by NAICS code. And so you could look to see how many businesses there are in your community, and by characteristics like how many, the size of the firm in terms of, do they have 1 employee? Do they have 50 employees? Do they have 200 employees? So the business counts data allows you to see how many car repair shops there might be in your community and the average size or the relative size of those types of communities. And the data is available at the provincial level and at the city level, municipal level, the census subdivision level. So you might not find the data available for all communities, but it's going to be available for many communities. And it's reported by NAICS code. So you, as I said, you can start to get a sense of how many businesses there are in a community or in the province and how that's changing over time. You can use the business patterns to look to see which industries might be growing or which ones might be declining. So that's the Canadian Business Counts, and here is just a sort of visual sort of indication of this is for Vancouver, Edmonton, and Calgary. We just randomly picked a couple of cities to show us as examples, and you'll get to see the sort of the business counts of how many industries or how many businesses there are that have 1 to 4 employees in the different industries. And these are broad classifications. So utilities, construction, 2-digit NAICS codes. Or retail, you'll see how many retail firms or businesses there are in Vancouver and in Edmonton and Calgary that have between 1 and 4 employees. And this is for June of 2023. So as I said, the data is released twice a year, June and December. So this is a really useful data set to provide just some quantitative numbers, how many there are in different communities and which industries. So that's a really useful starting point from a business perspective. Here we're getting into, I was starting to get a little ahead of myself earlier, but Statistics Canada also has data on retail and wholesale statistics. So for retail businesses, we have monthly and quarterly surveys on retail industries, but we also have what's called the Canadian International Merchandise Trade application, a web application, which is I think it's one of the most highly used tools on Statistics Canada's website. If I have time at the end of the day, I'll quickly show you where to find it on our website. But it, as I said, it allows you to look at detail in terms of who are our largest exporters in terms of countries, and who are the largest importers into Canada by different commodities. So if you're thinking of bringing in beverages or food or airplane parts, you can use the Canadian International Merchandise Trade application to get a handle on the size and the quantity and the nature of the different imports and exports. So that's import and export data specifically. And you'll see on the web tool that there's one link for import data and one link for export data. And that's reported, again, I don't want to get too far ahead, but that's reported by different codes that allow you to sort of characterize the information. And we'll get into that if I have time later. So those are some key data sources with respect to business data in particular. One of the key aspects of the sources I've shown you are that they allow you to quantify, they allow you to measure, they allow you to get a handle on just what the numbers are for particular businesses and particular industries and things of that nature. And they're long-standing data sets, so you can do some historical analysis and can be quite useful if you're trying to get a sense of the trends. Remember, we talked about earlier about how you can use some of this data to, establish some trend pattern. One of the newer surveys that Statistics Canada has developed, and this is a survey that was developed during the COVID pandemic, developed in the second quarter of 2020, was a survey called the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions. And this was a survey that was started to fill the gap because we needed information on just how businesses are faring, given all the circumstances and the challenges that COVID had presented. But the unique aspect about this particular survey is that it not only provides counts, but it provides more sort of qualitative information. And what I mean by that is it allows us to capture information on how businesses are feeling, like their expectations. We have questions on this survey that ask, what are your expectations over the next 3 months with respect to business revenue? Do you expect it to increase? Do you expect it to stay the same? Do you expect it to decline? What are your expectations in terms of hiring? Do you anticipate hiring over the next 3 months or the next 12 months? Or do you anticipate eliminating staff? So this is a survey that allows us to get at some really interesting characteristics that aren't available from other business surveys that are more focused on just counts per se. The other important characteristic of this survey is that it allows us to look at businesses by a number of different characteristics. So it reports data by industry, the 2-digit codes. You'll get to see how the expectations of people or business owners in mining or accommodation and food services differ from those who are in public services or education services or retail in terms of expectations, anticipations, things of that nature. And they might be substantially different. But this survey also allows us to look at the characteristics of business owners. And so somebody was asking earlier about the time lag. Statistics Canada recognizes that we need to be able to report more timely data. And we're trying to work on that. But we also recognize we need to report data that's more a characteristic of the population per se. So this survey allows us to look at not just number of businesses, but number of businesses owned by women, number of businesses owned by visible minorities, number of businesses owned by immigrants, number of businesses owned by Indigenous population. So it allows us to look at some really detailed characteristics in terms of how the different social and cultural composition of the population is made up from a business owner perspective. It also lets us look at specific characteristics such as importer businesses and exporter businesses. And you can compare, do importer businesses expect to or anticipate more supply chain challenges than exporter businesses? That is one of the characteristics or one of the aspects of the data that's available from the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions. And I'm just going to quickly show a couple of examples of some of the data from the this data is reported quarterly, so every 4 times a year. And this is just a quick example of some of the challenges and expectations that the data reported in terms of, for Canada, just over half or 56% of businesses expected inflation is going to continue to be an obstacle. And that may or may not be surprising to you. Just over half of the businesses expect profitability to remain unchanged. A lot of the businesses report challenges in terms of attracting and retaining skilled staff, or attracting and attaining staff per se. Rising cost of inputs, shortages of labor. So this is the type of data that's available from the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions that we want people to be familiar with. And because it's a relatively new survey, we often find that people aren't aware that this survey is available, and that it's available for Canada, provincial, and for 20 of Canada's largest cities. So data is available for Edmonton, data is available for Calgary. Not all cities, but 20 of Canada's largest cities. And that's because it's a sample survey. And I mentioned earlier that I'll talk about the census and a sample. So census collects information from everyone. Sample survey collects information randomly. And so we collect information, but the number of people in Edmonton or in Calgary who are actually sampled and included might be relatively small. So we have to make sure that we can only release data that we feel confident is relatively good. And that's why sometimes you'll find that data isn't necessarily available, because the actual data is based on just a few people. And so that's one of the reasons why there's different levels for which some of the data is available and some is not. I'm not going to turn this into a research methods class. I know none of you want to hear that. But I just want to give you an indication as you're exploring the data, why you'll find that sometimes the data is available at different areas, and sometimes it's only at the provincial level, for example. So that's a survey on, or the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions, and it's a really crucial sort of data set. Here's just another example. The survey allows us to look at how rural compared to urban businesses are faring with respect to increasing costs and things of that nature. This is one of the few surveys that allows us to look at. Oftentimes people say, well, what about rural businesses? What about smaller communities? So this survey will allow you to look to see how the differences are emerging, or what differences there are between urban and rural businesses. In this case, we're talking about the obstacles and challenges of rising inflation and things of that nature. And we can also look at, this is an example using Winnipeg. We just randomly used a couple of communities. We can look at how businesses, based on duration, how long they've been in business, how they fare with respect to the different challenges. So the data allows us to look to say businesses that are expecting operating income and operating expenses to increase over the next 3 months. And you see how newer businesses just trying to get established can face so much challenges compared to businesses that are long established, businesses that have been in business for 20 years or more, compared to those that have 2 years or less with respect to increasing operating expenses and things of that nature. This is just an example of how the type of data that you can find from that survey. Any questions on that? Linda, if there are any, feel free to interject. If not, I'd like to make sure that we touch on and I'll try and make sure we show you an example of data that's from Statistics Canada, but not necessarily published on Statistics Canada's website. This is information that's available on Innovation in Science Canada, which is a federal government department, but it's information that can be crucially important for people who are thinking about developing a business plan or trying to get a sense of the what are the realistic expectations with respect to business costs. What are the costs I should be building into my plan? Insurance and labor and all those sort of aspects. So the financial performance data from Innovation and Science Canada allows you to look to see what are the sort of the typical sort of business costs and financial costs for businesses by NAICS, by North American Industrial Classification, but by business size. And in this size, I mean by revenue. So businesses of less than 50,000 in revenue compared to businesses of more than 50,000. And you can use the data as almost a template to sort of start to build or start to plan or map out business plan and business expectations. So hopefully, if I have time, I'll quickly show you where to find that those data sets. If not, Francisco's likely posted the link where you can explore it at your leisure after this session, and you'll see the sort of the amount of information that's there. You can develop your own reports for specific NAICS. You just type in the NAICS that you're looking for, and it will give you information that can be extremely helpful in terms from a planning perspective. And then just to wrap up, before I have time to quickly show the website, is we have developed several sort of tools that are of use to people. They're interactive tools that are on Statistics Canada's website, where you can look at economic tracker and monthly indicators for different sort of businesses by different size and things of that nature. These are factors like costs, consumer price index factors, and things of that nature, as well as labor market information. So I talked earlier about labor market information. Even though we're not delving too much into it in this session, you can look at labor market information and how it's relating to different industries across the country and across the provinces, as well as a survey that looks at job vacancies. It's the job vacancy survey. And that's a survey that allows us to collect information from employers in terms of identifying the number of jobs that are going vacant for which they cannot find staff for. So it's really useful and really sort of interesting to look to see by industry which industries are facing the biggest challenges in terms of filling staffing positions, job vacancy rates, and how that's changed over time. So those are some key data sources that, again, aren't necessarily business related. They're more labor market related, but they can be really useful in terms of setting a context for providing a context for understanding the business data. So I have thrown a lot at you. I recognize that. As I said, this is our generic contact information, the InfoStats at Statistics Canada. Please feel free to reach out to us. Part of our job is to make sure that people are able to find and to use this information. So we'll be happy to help if you have questions. Francisco, Laszlo, and I always are helping clients sort of find the information on our website and things of that nature. So we're always happy to do that. And then I'll quickly wrap up. Statistics Canada is slowly moving into the 21st century. So for the people who want to access the information in different ways, we have a StatsCan app that we're encouraging data users to use. And as you can tell, I'm not very young, but young people tend to be a little bit more agile in terms of accessing data from different ways. So StatsCan app is one way that we're encouraging people to make access to the data. And then if you want to learn more about StatsCan and the work we do, we've developed a podcast that touches on a whole host of different subjects. So that's just a quick introduction and summary of the type of information. So before I go to the StatsCan website, any questions?
Yes, we do. Let's answer a few of them. Darren, maybe some will be answered when you go to the StatsCan website. Sure. Just a few more housekeeping notes for people. You'll have to grab the links out of chat. We're not emailing them to you. This recording is going to go on the Business Link YouTube channel. A reminder to everyone also that Business Link has a market research department. So we have access also to Stats Canada, just like you do, along with several other large databases. So we can generate some good reporting too as well. So you can head on over to the Business Link website, and where it says services, scroll down to market research, and you'll learn more there as well. And we also hold a workshop on how to conduct market research, and we do reference StatsCan things as well. So a couple of questions, and maybe it's going to happen when you're on the site, Darren, is how do you find the community and the Canadian Business Council table?
If I may, Linda, sorry to interject. I'll let you go, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to go to the StatsCan website. So
Wonderful.
I'm not abandoning you. I'm just, while you're asking questions, I'm just going to get the website up.
So we have a few about finding things, and maybe that'll be helpful for people to see when you share your screen for the StatsCan website. So we have how do you find the community and the Canadian Business Council table. I was having a hard time finding data about childcare businesses in Alberta, specifically Calgary, just sort of a bit of a navigation of the landscape there, because I do get a lot of those questions as well. If they're interested in getting detailed information about specific industry sectors like the aerospace sector, how can you do this using the data? So looking for vendors and company sizes and things like that.
Okay. There's a lot to unpack there. I'll start with a couple of basics. And then we'll go from there to, maybe I'll quickly show you, I'll show you the NAICS, how you find the NAICS, and then I'll just quickly, in fact, I think it would be helpful to show you the latest release from the Canadian Business Survey, because there are actually 28 data tables that are part of that release. And so I gave you a very quick synopsis of what's available, but if I point you to where you can find that, then you could explore them further and you'll get a better understanding of just how detailed the information is. If I have time, I'll show you the Canadian International Merchandise Trade application. That's one of the real sort of crucial aspects. But as I always like to say, before we run, let's walk. So let's quickly, for those who are new to coming to Statistics Canada's website, or who have come and were a little bit overwhelmed, I just want to sort of, everyone's able to see the website, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I just want to sort of draw your attention to the fact that Francisco and I always like to joke that one of the great things about StatsCan's website is you can get to information from different ways, but one of the challenges is you can get to information from different ways. So sometimes people find something, but they can't remember how they got to it. So I'm going to start from the basics and just sort of give you an indication of when you come to the landing page or the home page, you're going to see these sort of 8, I call them tabs. I don't know if they're actually tabs, but you'll see these 8 sort of these blue tabs along the top: subject, data, analysis, reference, geography, census. I talked about the census and how crucially important it is from a Statistics Canada perspective. It has its own tab at the top of our homepage that will take you directly to the census. And so I won't have time today. We do offer workshops on how to use census data. But I encourage people to explore the census, but you'll also have information on people who are participants of surveys, and then about StatsCan, and then the Government of Canada. If I have time, I'll go to that, because that's where you can go to the link to the Innovation and Science department, where you'll find the financial performance data. But as I said, before we get there, I just want to say that, you can start to see some of the sort of tools I indicated earlier, as well as the contact information. But as a starting point, I always encourage people, if you're not clear of where to find information, like there was a host there, there's NAICS, there's childcare, a host of questions that were sort of emerging. Sometimes the best place to start is just to think about from a broad perspective. So if you go to the subjects tab, and again, I'm calling them tabs, I don't know if they're actually tabs. If you go to the subjects tab and click on it, it will give you sort of the starting point, the springboard to all the sort of the broad themes that that are available. So for example, we have data on business performance and ownership, and business and consumer services. But we also have information on families and households and things of that nature. So if you wanted to know more about, household composition, We have information on labor. So if you want to know more about the job vacancy survey, that survey I sort of alluded to very quickly at the end there, that would be under the labor. As well as we have been trying to sort of group information into what we call hubs. So we're trying to make it a little bit easier for people to find. So if you're particularly interested in food and food price costs and things of that nature, we have a food price hub that's relatively new. Or if you're interested in transportation or things of that nature, or industry, you can use these hubs, and they will take you to sort of a place that has grouped together much of the data I talked about, but in a manner that's going to be easier to find. Since we're focusing on business, I'll just use the business performance and ownership subject as a starting point. And I'll just give you an indication in terms of when you come, it's kind of like the landing page for all the different business statistics that we talked about. So business dynamics, business ownership. Remember, I talked about the business registry and business ownership data that's available, financial statements and performance indicators, representation, as well as some of the tools that you could use to look at. This is one of the tools I alluded to earlier in terms of I'll just click on it quickly. You can look at some of the tools we can use in terms of the data that's available. Takes a few moments to load. That's why I'm sort of hesitant to go to a lot of these tools, but you can look at representation of women by business ownership and things of that nature. So that might be something of interest to people, as well as, a whole host of others, other topics. So that's a starting point. In terms of business information. So if I want to know about business ownership, I can click on here, and it's going to take me from there. It's going to take me to a resource of all the different data tables and references that are available. So I can look to see if I'm interested in particular province or provincial data, and you'll get an indication of the type of data that's available. Expectations and economic outlook among business owners by racialized individuals. Remember, I talked about the Canadian Business Survey. It talks about providing data specific to different characteristics of ownership, women, Indigenous, racialized population. So this is an example, one of the tables that would be available. I don't know how much time, I want to try and cover everything. I don't think I'll be able to. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to select home. So if anyone would follow, I'm going to select home. It's going to take us back to the home page. And I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm just going to use the search. And I'm going to type in NAICS. I'm going to click the loop. And I want to show you the NAICS information that we talked about earlier in terms of how the information is classified and how you can explore it further. So we talked about how we have broad classifications. And if I was interested in wholesale, if I click on this, so if you go to the link and click on this, it'll provide you more detail. It'll describe what the characteristics are, as well as sort of the type of work that's done. And then you'll start to see how it delves into further and further detail. So if I was interested particularly on food and beverage and tobacco merchants and wholesalers, I can delve into further and further detail. Food merchants. And this is one of the advantages of being familiar with the NAICS. And if you want to learn a little bit more about sort of how the activity is defined, you can display definitions, and it'll provide a definition of what exactly the sort of business activity is. So if you want to understand where your business might fit in, this will provide a bit of a description for that. So that's the NAICS. Linda, sorry, remind me, what were some of the other questions that people had? There was NAICS, there was business counts.
Some of it looks like it's answered. We had the daycare answered. Someone is having difficulty getting specific information about aerospace companies. So we would find first that, I'm sure, in the NAICS code. We'd have to look up the NAICS code first. And then if they want information like vendors and company sizes and products and turnover, that's when they would start to get all these different tables and reporting. Is that
Yes. Yes, although I will admit, we won't necessarily have data. Again, as the National Statistical Agency, we won't necessarily have detailed data. We rarely have detailed data on specific vendors and things of that nature. What we do is provide more of a aggregate description of the industry as opposed to specific specific business names or things of that. That's not necessarily the type of data that's available from Statistics Canada. Again, we have to protect confidentiality. We have to make sure that if people respond to our surveys, we're not directly or indirectly identifying people so they can say, aha, I know what business this is. We have to protect confidentiality of our respondents. So we won't have that level of detail. It's more of a way to aggregate or characterize the businesses as opposed to a specific business from statistics. There might be other data sources that provide that, but that's not something that the National Statistical Agency generally focuses on, just so people are clear. Because sometimes it is helpful to recognize what we don't have just as well as what we do.
right? So basically what we're talking about here is broad information. Once you know your NAICS code, for example, once you determine you're in the aerospace industry, or that's what you want to look up information for, you find your NAICS code first, and then you can do things like find your labor economic indicators, your performance indicators, your financial data indicators, using all the different tool sets that are available to you to do that deeper dive into what you're doing. So it all begins with the NAICS code for sure.
NAICS is the foundation, even though it may not be the most exciting. The NAICS is the foundation because that's how much of the data is reported. So spending a little bit of time learning about that and become familiar. And my part of it is just exploring to see, well, where would that fit in terms of the different broad classifications. And you might find, just like most research, you might explore and realize, oh, this isn't the right code. I got to go back. And you will find the details that you're looking for. And as I said, from there, you can start to use that as a way. Like I won't have time today, unfortunately, but I really encourage you to look at the financial performance data and see just how valuable it can be from a business planning perspective. Any other questions? I know we're running out of time, but any other questions?
Your colleagues have been busy answering them behind the scenes as well, which is great. And just a few other housekeeping items for people as well. This recording is going to go onto our YouTube channel within 24 hours. No, the slides don't go out, but we certainly have the recording available so you can watch it over and over again, along with past presentations from Statistics Canada and all the other webinars we do that are outside of our workshop series. They're all on our YouTube channel. I did post that link in chat for everyone, so you can go over and watch those as well. Also, Business Link has a market research department. I don't know if people know that you can go to your library, your public library, with your library card and access lots and lots of statistical information there from other database sources as well as Stats Canada. And the same applies to Business Link. We have access to 4 or 5 giant data collection databases that cost thousands of dollars a year to have subscriptions to. So we can generate other types of reporting for you out of those databases. Once you know what your NAICS code is, and once you understand what the information is you want, we can be a helpful free resource to you at Business Link as well. So that link went into the chat for you as well. We also hold a workshop every 6 weeks or so on how to do market research, and we have a lot of information in that. So whether you're a business owner, a consumer, maybe you're an economic development officer for your local community, whoever you may be, if you have clients or you yourself are looking to figure out how to do market research or to gather that information and be more efficient and effective with it, we have a workshop called Market Research for Business Success. Come on in and join that. That's a free interactive workshop. All of our workshops rotate around quite frequently, and you can find that on our website as well. Stats Can and Darren and the gang come in at least 2 or 3 times a year. I think you come in and present a few times a year, so watch for that. If you want to know what's going on with Business Link, you can sign up for our newsletter, and everything gets shipped out via newsletter to you as to what's new and happening. And Stats Canada also has, you can subscribe to their newsletter as well. Is that correct, Darren?
Yeah, our daily. We have a daily newsletter. It's called The Daily. And on our homepage, and I've just shown you an example of Canadian Business Survey. So if you go to our homepage, you can subscribe to our daily. So I hope that was helpful, everyone. Sorry we sort of ran out of time, but there's so much to cover that I hope I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I hope that was helpful, and hopefully we've encouraged you to explore the data further.
Well, thanks, Darren. I'm letting Lazo finish typing here. I'm going to let everyone grab links for another 1 minute. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Julian, if you're there and you want to stop the recording, please feel free to do so. But